Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. We would really appreciate it if you guys went and reviewed us on Apple or Spotify. Those reviews really help people find the podcast and help it get recognized. And, if you've been enjoying the show, we really appreciate your support. Another thing that you can do to support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/the Team House.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eyes On, a reasonably well-informed discussion of geopolitical events and about the time it takes you to PT, drive to work, or whatever else it takes you to do in 30 minutes or so. I'm Andy Milburn, former Marine Infantry and Special Operations Officer, now toiling for the Team House. D, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Really excited about this one. It's kind of a continuation from our last episodes, which I'd love for everyone to check out if they haven't, about our hits on, the IRGC and their proxies in Syria and Iraq. And we're going to touch on, the continued strikes on the Houthis in Yemen. And I think talk a little bit more about a broader sense of, deterrence. And because I've been reading it, almost every day. There are some folks on Twitter and Instagram who talk about deterrence, and I don't even know exactly what it means in terms of deterring what's going on, because it doesn't seem, we got the strongest military in the world by a lot, and we don't seem to be deterring much.
No, that's a great point and a great question. Without making it a war college class, I'll dive into and I'll give you a kind of a 5-minute answer on that and hopefully make it entertaining. But backtrack, yes. So the Department of Defense just released the BDA, that's battle damage assessment, on Twitter for the attacks in. Let me see. It was in Iraq. Actually, it was all together. Attacks Iraq, Syria, and in Yemen. Okay, so they report 80. Oh, this must be just Iraq and Syria. Sorry about this, because they're talking about 85 targets. 80 of 85 targets have suffered serious damage or were totally destroyed, with casualties of militia members expected to be around 50 to 60. Okay, we've got to ask ourselves, right? How come those 50 to 60 dudes did not get the word after a week of publicly telegraphing that we were coming? Less surprising, no members of the IRGC or Iranian nationals were killed. Okay, that was official DoD release. Certainly not in the strikes. Interestingly enough, though, not widely reported, but a senior Iran-backed figure within the militias, Naji al-Karbi, was assassinated by unknown gunmen in Maysan, Iraq. Okay, coincidence? I don't know. Totally don't. I'm not.
Right.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting that we didn't kill any guys in the strikes, but this one dude did disappear. But that's kind of a distraction. I think.
Andy, can I cut in? What does IRGL mean? Sorry, this is for me because I'm a dummy.
No, IRGC, right?
Oh, he was an actual IRGC guy. Okay.
No. He was. Actually, no. Good point. He was not. He was Iraqi. He was
okay.
But he was a senior PMC member. Notice in the strikes, no senior PMC members were killed.
Yeah.
So I think it was mostly kind of. Remember when we bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade and killed essentially the cleaning staff.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's what happened here, but certainly You wonder about these guys. Maybe they were provided, maybe that was their resume line, BDA. That's your role. Anyway, I digress. My point is, it's a distraction because we didn't kill any senior members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. All right, I'm not saying, I'm not you know me, I mean, I'm not saying never extolling killing for the sake of killing, but it's hard to know how we can detract from capability without removing the guys who are certainly involved in the transfer of knowledge and technical know-how. So yeah, when you look at the list of stuff destroyed, there was that dramatic footage of the stuff cooking off in Al-Qaim. I mean, that whole area, though, as is Yemen, is just one giant ordnance dump, and it's quite easy to have left some older ammo in a warehouse to give some dramatic effect. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I don't, and I'm getting somewhere on this. I'm not just diminishing the strikes by any means.
Sure,
I am, but I'm saying
that's my job. I'll do it.
Yeah, maybe there's a wider picture. But it's a tremendously difficult task. I mean, we're trying to reduce capability in an area where there is just a massive amount of ordnance. So they're only reliant on the Iranians for certain key components, all right, for the missiles to come through. And these are relatively small components and quite easy to smuggle. So it's not, yes, we are destroying things, and it looks great on video, but as far as removing capability or even disabling the Iranians' ability, or rather these proxies' ability to act for a period of time is not. I don't think we're achieving it. Okay, so anyway, to your point, so it doesn't look like we're achieving deterrence. I'm going to come back to that specific question, but in answer to yours, look, I can't remember the War College definition, and I have an abhorrence of people who do read things out from doctrine. But but deterrence is very simply, it's a practice of discouraging or restraining someone in world politics. That's usually a nation state from taking unwanted actions. Okay, and it involves an effort to stop or prevent an action as opposed to making someone or trying to make a state do something which is compellence. All right, which is something different. Okay, this is slightly more than semantics. Okay, and because there's really, when we talk about deterrence, you may say, in fact, I should have primed you to say this. Hey, Andy, how are we deterring after the fact? Okay, and a lot of people get confused by this. Something happens, we're really responding. And you'll see the military comes up with terms like flexible deterrent option and flexible deterrent response. But they come down to the same thing as far as objective, because if you are responding, and the way that we are, our intent is to threaten escalation, right? We're not simply punishing. The implication is, hey, we will do this and worse if you continue. All right, so response, deterrence, all wrapped into one. It's meaningless to distinguish between the two. And these packages that the military puts together involve various options for the president to decide between. It's just like a sushi menu. All right.
What's interesting
now,
like
deterrence by punishment. The other deterrence, by the way, is deterrence by
too,
denial. That's when you put a force. You prevent. You make the enemy's objective less attainable, all right? And it might be, sticking U.S. troops in Poland or the Baltic states, and so they would be in the path of a Russian invading force, which makes it less likely that the Russians are going to want to invade, blah, blah, blah. Deterrence by punishment historically is less effective. And when I say historically, the last 3 decades, okay? But we, United States, use the term deterrence all the time, and it is deeply embedded in our national security strategy. In Europe, it's the basis of our containment of Russian adventurism, as well as actions in the gray zone. Of course, in Korea, it's policy to deter North Korea, not just from invading, but just further provocations. And then throughout Asia, of course, we're trying to deter Chinese belligerence and gray zone encroachments on areas subject to territorial disputes. So, deterrence is it when it comes to us. I would argue, I'll tell you what, when deterrence fails, it's because one of the key components is missing. This is not from doctrine. But, one of the things that I think we United States miss, and it's perhaps the most important aspect of deterrence, is this critical fact. And it is the perception of the potential aggressor. In other words, it is how that guy views the world that matters, not the actual prospects of success. I'm sorry, not actual prospects of victory of his success, or any other objective measurement. So we've got to be careful not mirror imaging. Wow, this would really hurt us. I imagine it's really hurting the Iranian regime. And we've seen deterrence go awry with Putin too, because we tend to mirror image and we haven't tried to really understand our adversary. So any strategy to prevent aggression, you've got to understand your enemy. His interests, motives, his imperatives, because when an aggressor acts, it's usually not raw opportunism. He's answering some other need. It may be domestic, but it's an immediate need. We need to understand that need and maybe find some other way of delivering it to him. In the last part. So yes, you've got to, you've got to step back from your ego, and you've got to look at things from the enemy's perspective, and you've got to take a combined arms approach. Okay, or a lot of our military guys will understand what I mean by this. What I mean is that when you engage the enemy with a weapon, you don't want to just engage him with one weapon. You want to engage him with a weapon that forces him to do something that makes him vulnerable to another weapon. Classic cases, direct fire weapons and indirect fire weapons. Okay, same thing applies to economic sanctions. All right, by imposing one sanction, making him hurt there, you drive him in another area where you can hurt him even more. Which means that you can't compartmentalize DIME or PMISI. All right, DIME is diplomatic, information, military, economic. It's a way that we separate all the elements of national power. I'm saying when we approach deterrence, we've got to act as all of this has to be fully integrated. And that is actually why you hear the term integrated deterrence as a buzzword. I would argue, yes, we're very good at using that term. We're less effective at actually doing it. I'll give you...
fair. That's a fair assessment, yeah.
Okay, so the other thing we do, I guess another principle, I'm just making this stuff up, but you can't forget the carrot. All right, when we talk about carrot and stick, you can't just totally forget about that. Preventing aggression, it's not all about making threats. It's also about offering assurances. All right, can you believe that's a Marine saying that? But it is.
Yeah, right. That's like sacrilege.
You've got to leave him an open door. You've got to leave him a face-saving exit that's going to make him look good to his domestic audience. And if you can enable him to achieve his objectives otherwise within a way that doesn't hurt your interest, then by all means go ahead and do so. This is what I mean about not standing on ego. But it involves very intensive strategic communication. That's another aspect where we often fall short with deterrence. Okay, everything is about OIE. Ask me what OIE stands for.
What's
OIE?
OIE?
Do you already know? Do you probably already know from the team house? Okay.
What is OIE? What does it mean?
Yeah. Operations in the information environment. I'm very careful about acronyms, so I now never try and spell out acronyms more than 3 letters after my dreadful debacle with AOB. But yeah, so operations in the information environment. Okay. We got to think about kinetic actions, relationship to information as supporting and supported. Okay, which means, typically we say, information operations support kinetic actions. But no, I mean, we have to think of military actions supporting operations in the information environment.
Right.
Okay, so, moving a U.S. brigade to Estonia. A brigade's not going to do anything against the Russian advance, but it's a significant military, although militarily negligible, it is a significant strategic
Right, because
event.
like, why
Yeah,
would the Russians wipe out a brigade
yeah, yeah.
and start a
Well, it's
global?
a tripwire. I mean, it's
Yeah,
early warning, whatever you want to call it. But the point is, it's an escalatory. You're pushing. Russia can't threaten the Baltic states, for instance, without going to war with the United States.
right.
Yes, everyone may know that conceptually, but by putting your blood on the line, you are really, you're literally putting skin in the game and
Yeah.
demonstrating that. Okay, which
So
is
in turn,
sorry.
in
Go ahead.
terms, no, yeah, no worries. In terms of like what's going on now with Iran and their proxies and Quds Force basically running amok in the region, and I would argue asserting a lot of dominance. What do we do specifically there to deter them from like, or trying to get them to reel their proxies in?
Yeah. So persuade who, D? Because we're getting to the crux of the problem here.
I mean, I guess it's Iran,
It's persuade Iran. Okay. Well, it doesn't
which I know
seem to be.
people don't want to talk about. Like, people are like, even when you hear everyone speaking about
Okay.
the Houthis, it's always Iran-backed Houthis.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like a buzzword that people
Well, let me
have been told
okay.
to say. Yeah,
Let
go
me
ahead.
wrap up. Let me wrap up very quickly your excellent question about deterrence. Okay, so
Sure.
because it leads into an answer to your next question. So successful deterrence typically involves a combination of taking, these combined arms actions, taking the aggressor's motivations seriously, understanding them, being clear about your intent, what you want the aggressor to do. So all of those things, and it's only think about the times it has worked. We've done all those things, and it's really worked most famously and the longest period of time in Korea since 1953 and during the Cold War. All right, but it's not working here. Okay, why isn't it working here? One answer may be, and this is not me. This is U.S. intelligence officials. I thought I'd never use that term, but it's semi-official. They assess that Iran does not exercise full control over the proxy and partner militia groups that are attacking U.S. personnel. So by that, neither the Houthis nor all the constellation of Iranian-backed militia groups in Iraq are taking their orders directly from the head of Quds Force, and there's probably a combination of factors. Okay, the kind of the cult of personality of Soleimani was able to exert over these leaders is gone. Ghani's a different type of individual, and the kids have grown up. They're ready to leave home. They have been armed to a level of sophistication that was, it just couldn't be imagined 5 years ago. And I mean, look at the Houthis. The Houthis, for God's sake, I mean, are disabling oil refineries and bringing and taking action that have global reverberations far beyond the Bab al-Mandeb. And Iran cannot control it anymore. That's pretty scary, right? And so the attacks continue. I mean, twice into Syria at bases, mission support site Euphrates. The picture of militia attacks on U.S. bases is in the chat. I always find it helpful to see a map, but you'll see there that the attacks have been mostly focused on the middle Euphrates Valley, certainly in this last week. To include an attack on the Al Amar oil fields. On a combat outpost in the Al Amar oil fields, which killed 7 members of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, who are our partners in fighting the Islamic State. No U.S. casualties in that. So it does appear, bottom line, as though the Iranians have lost control of their proxies. There's a lot of bluster going on too. They're not going to admit that, and they're issuing, they issued a warning yesterday, right? um, warning United States against attacking their two surveillance ships, the Bashad and the Saviz. So, what makes it worse is they're on the posturing platform too, and are not going to admit that they can't.
They can't lose.
The train has left the station.
Yeah, they can't lose face at home, right? They still have to deal with their own internal politics and stuff like that. It's still about regime security at the end of the day for them.
Yeah, 100%. And while everything continues, we haven't talked about Gaza, and I'm not going to get into that topic today. But as you know, I've got a contract to write a book about it, and in fact, we're going to be doing a couple of episodes from there towards the end of this month, and so I'll at least be able to address the military campaign in more detail there. But elsewhere, in the Middle East, so while all this is going on, our adversaries are certainly exploiting our absence or our weaknesses. I can't remember if I already talked to you about this, Steve, but it doesn't matter. We're talking with the audience now. But the chairman, all right, of the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Committee, the PMC, an Iraqi position. Remember, I spoke about him. I spoke about him last week. Fayyad. Yeah, he was involved allegedly in the U.S. on the attack on the U.S. Embassy in 2019. Well, he met this week with the Russian ambassador to Iraq, Khrushchev, and met this week in Baghdad, and they talked about exchanging experiences, and even mutual training. Okay, so who knows?
Yeah.
You know how the Russians love having these PMC, literally PMCs. Now they've got.
I know.
Potential right there, influence in Iraq. I thought that was fairly notable. At the same time, the Chinese visited Uzbekistan this week. We U.S. have been courting Uzbekistan, obviously since 9/11, but recently among the stands, Uzbekistan has been the one that we've been working with most closely. Chinese,
so we can launch out of, right?
Well, a number of reasons. It's politically, yes. It's a really viable position. It became increasingly important after we pulled out of Afghanistan. And we provide. I've been there a few times. Actually, it's a beautiful country. We provide soft support training, their soft military, which has become a little dodgy at times. The head of their special operations guys, a guy we trained, left to join the Islamic State. So, these things are always tough to manage. And here we are now. The Chinese have signed an agreement, a strategic agreement, an all-weather comprehensive strategic partnership. Sorry, I was looking for exactly what it was.
All weather, huh?
All weather, yeah. So the only other country in the region who's part of this all weather agreement is Pakistan.
Okay.
So it's a separate bilateral agreement, but it's the only other country that China has called an all weather ally. Mm-hmm. So Uzbekistan, all weather ally to China, fair weathered friend to the United States. It would appear.
So is that Pakistan, they chose to do that, right? China aligning with Pakistan is to give it to India a bit. This is a little bit out of what we're talking about, but that's my assumption.
Say that again, D.
So the reasoning why China is done that all-weather strategic partnership with Pakistan is to deter, or for lack of a better word, India's power in the region.
China and Pakistan have always had a close relationship. Is not quite the term, but it's kind of a mutually supportive relationship. Yes, they've had, they've gone at it. They've had arguments over various things over the years, but as you're aware, China and India have literally come to blows.
Yeah.
And have caused, have killed each other's soldiers several times in the last year.
Yeah.
Often in these extraordinary unarmed brawls, which both sides seem to agree doesn't cross any red lines.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly, Pakistan's closer within China's sphere of influence, and they both have a lot of interest in Afghanistan, and those interests, of course, are not necessarily ours.
Sure, of course.
Hey, dude, last thing though, I like this from oddly enough from a dude in Tel Aviv who commented about the fact that most American, even U.S. military officials privately saying that the capabilities of the Houthis have not been significantly degraded by the campaign. And this researcher in Tel Aviv, military researcher, says, taking on the Houthis is like fighting fog. Interesting. I mean, I've heard descriptions, the same thing about Hamas in Gaza. So no new lessons here.
So Andy, what will make progress? Like, is it more of a covert thing? Is it more, I don't know, drones, or I don't know
look,
what.
Strikes can be immensely effective, but they have to be. If you want them to have military effect, and by that I mean take away capability, obviously you can't telegraph them. Okay,
absolutely.
And they've, although thank God we got away from attritional warfare and adding up number of people killed, but you do have to take off the board the guys with the expertise who cannot be replaced. Right? Not the 50 or 60 guys who are too dumb to have got the word that the US were coming.
Right.
And it's got to be combined with other things, to include working with partners on the ground. You can't do all this remotely. You've got to build relationships on the ground too.
Sure.
And there's got to be a carrot. Remember that? I mentioned that. We've got to start thinking, how do we offer the Houthis a carrot? How do we provide them an incentive? Because we can't deter them.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going to deter them? They're not particularly scared of death. They've been fighting all their lives. I mean, they're going to keep shooting stuff until they stop having stuff to shoot.
So let me ask you something. Like, in terms for like the talking heads or like the opinion makers on Twitter and
less of that. That's what we are.
The thought leaders, right? Absolutely. But like the thought leaders, I mean, I don't think that's going to brief so well, like offering the Houthis a deal of some kind.
Well, that's the thing. Well, that's the thing. But posturing and ego just don't belong in geopolitics.
Right.
And yes, of course, we play to a domestic audience, but at the same time, ultimately, our criteria for success are that shipping is allowed to proceed unimpeded, and that stability is restored. And if the Houthis get something in that process that they wanted, yes, people can say, "Oh, we gave in," or it can just, it's just a sensible approach. Otherwise, we're going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now. Think about the cost in terms of U.S. defense budget. Just merchant ships cannot defend themselves against these missiles. There is no way. You cannot design a system that is going to be economically viable. The cost of these ships having to choose now between taking war insurance or going the long way around the Cape is driving global costs up. All right, and it doesn't matter if your supply chain isn't directly affected by the Red Sea. Other supply chains that are interrelated probably are.
Right.
So
it'll have a trickle down.
It affects every country in the world. Tremendous.
Right.
So, do we want to salvage our sense of being America the strong and just keep dropping bombs until literally we have flattened Yemen, or do we take a little more intelligent approach?
Yeah, you would think taking the intelligent approaches.
And listen, I'm all about killing the enemy. You know that. And I'm saying you've got to put an incentive in there too. By all means, scare the crap out of him, but do it by going after his capabilities, hurting him, not what we're doing right now, which is kind of pinging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plinking. Well, that's probably... I lose track of time here, but I think you're keeping us under the...
I have a question. I have one question about that.
Okay. Well, since you've asked the question,
in terms of the Red Sea,
you must still be enjoying talking to me, so that's a good sign.
No, I am. Yeah, this is the best. So in terms of like the issues in the Red Sea with the Houthis and stuff like that, does it make sense to bring in a more broader coalition, not just the UK? Because it seems to affect the Europe right away in the short and medium term, and then the rest of the world in the long term. Where's France? Where's Italy? Where are the other NATO countries? Where's Egypt too? Like, why isn't Egypt doing anything?
Well, there are a number of coalition countries involved. In fact, there's a coalition task force, and I can't tell you all the countries that are involved in it. But I want to say that it either falls under the direction of under NAVCENT direction, but at least is coordinated with NAVCENT. And
what's NAVCENT?
I'm sorry, it's Naval Command Central. So all naval forces in the Middle East. But yes, there is a coalition task force. It has largely, and again, I know I'll be torn up if I'm wrong on this, but it's largely to date been focused on the Somali piracy problem. But there's crossover membership or an interest, obviously, in the Red Sea. So yes, there are coalition efforts underway.
Okay,
but escorting ships is it's an incredibly time intensive and expensive proposition. Escorting ships, it's not like the Second World War where you're traveling along in convoy, but you're covering them with your air defense assets, which don't come cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, look at, the U.S. Carney has shot down 14 drones, all right?
Right.
An SM-2 missile, is, I want to say $2 million. I know it's in the millions, all right? So... supposedly, say it just fired 14 missiles. I mean, we're talking $28 million.
Yeah, it's not exactly cost effective, right? And it's not a long-term solution.
Probably, don't even add up to $1 million.
Yeah.
So it's just not, the way we're doing things right now is just not cost effective, and it's not militarily effective. Look, I'm not pretending to be smart here. Look, I was part of the problem. I'm just saying it's hard to find a solution. So please don't think I'm sitting here criticizing the guys who are just like me, who are trying to figure out a way to curb the threat and do all these things without bringing the United States into war. It's a tremendously hard problem.
Yeah, it's an impossible needle to thread. It's tough.
Well, not impossible, but it's very difficult.
Okay,
that's again.
The hole is about this big. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, no, absolutely.
And I just want to mention, I know, you've served, Jack and Dave have served, everybody who's on the show served, and a lot of the folks that watch the show are veterans. Having said that, I mean, and it's not their fault at all. The escapade in Iraq is mainly to blame for Iran filling that power vacuum in the region.
Yeah, D, I mean, I can't imagine that there's anyone out there who still thinks that invading Iraq was a good idea from the point of view of U.S. interest. I mean, if there is, we welcome, of course, because we welcome alternate views. But I would tend to agree. Hey, before we sign off, then, when we talk about the effect that, because sadly, because of our intervention, we've seen, we've left a bad taste as we leave, for obvious reasons, in Afghanistan, and now in Iraq, for reasons that are partly not our fault, but partly are, to be fair. We've kind of said, we kind of allowed those conditions to come to fruition. Extremists,
Yeah.
Or politicians in power in Iraq who do not like us. No, I'm not talking about influencing elections. I'm just saying we turned a blind eye for a long time to kind of the way the Shia power base was continuing to gather power there, and ignoring our ignoring our advice. Hey, so anyway, on the last thing, on a bright note, that picture in chat, you can throw it up. That's as we talk about our adversaries and non-aligned countries, all kind of making plans for a world in which the United States doesn't dominate quite the same way it has to date. And that photograph is of an Iranian military delegation to Riyadh. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, an Iranian military delegation to Riyadh, unprecedented, certainly in our lifetimes, I believe. And went very nicely, apparently. So that's probably not, that's not something that the Saudis may do, although they did put that picture out on Twitter. But you see what I'm saying? There's no one, very few countries aside from our traditional friends and European friends are saying, oh yeah, good point. We should side with the United States because you still do represent democracy and liberal Western values, et cetera, et cetera. Those,
but Andy, so even even Saudi Arabia, buddying up with Iran. Let's say we did pull out of the Red Sea in the Middle East, and the Houthis keep going. Eventually that peace deal or that ceasefire with Saudi Arabia is going to end. Let's say we stop selling them weapons. Like, what happens when there's no free maritime travel in the Red Sea because we're not there?
No, I get it though, D. But everyone knows we're not going to do that because ultimately global trade is in our. The free flow of commerce and global trade is definitely rock solid within our interests. In fact, we're the one country that has so far not disappeared into even a moderate recession. We're still an economic powerhouse. We dominate the world in that sense, very much so. And so we, more than anyone, stand to gain or lose by what happens to global trade. And I think some people, the isolationists, forget that.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's just interesting, the Saudi Arabia flirting with Iran or flirting with, or Iraq flirting with the Russian delegation. Yeah, it's like at the end of the day, it's like, oh, pay attention to us. It's like, it's like a cry for attention from them.
I don't know. I think these are deliberate long-term decisions based on an assessment of America's role in the world. I'm not hopefully sounding like a chest banging extremist here, but yes, I think that is clearly evident.
Yeah,
there's many other factors in play too.
Sure.
So even though we may think of the world as being as fitting into certain patterns, post Cold War, right, with kind of the axis of whatever you want to call it, the axis of resistance or the axis of evil, or of just the angry men, North Korea, Russia, China, Iran, but they, absolutely the threat that it's not that any of them can supplant the United States, but they can certainly undermine the U.S.'s ability to defend its own interests, and that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think we need to look at it like a market share of like any kind of market. Like, as long as we have the dominating share of it, like, we're okay. For a reductive view, from a dumb like me, okay. I think that's the way to look at it.
That's a great comment. Hey, D, before we've got, yes, absolutely. Hey, we've got to get we got to get our email or something. I mean, I'm sorry, thing for questions put up because someone sent me some really cool comments from last.
Yeah, in the shows to come, I'll aggregate some of the questions and we'll answer them at the tail end of it.
Hey, I got this. All right, I thought it's by a drone dude in Ukraine. I know him. In fact, he worked for me. All right, so I know this sounds like a tame audience, but we don't have we have to use my contact info until we can get one. Anyway, he said if we assume similar employment in Ukraine, as in Ukraine, all right, when we were out there, it seems the Shahed is designed such that if even with GPS, even with the jammer, it can still can revert to inertial navigation, which makes it jam resistant. So unless the operator, this is my friend writing. So unless the operator mission planner had access to U.S. flight plans and knew where, when to program the Shahed so it would follow the U.S. drone, it seems unlikely or was a crazy coincidence in timing. Or they employed a different type of drone with a pilot fully in control during a flight, and they had been observing U.S. drone flights from the base. And then, on my comment about Stinger, correct. It hasn't shot down a drone. Neither has the Avenger. Neither has the CRAM. But this guy, Audi, his first name he's a Stinger officer by background. So of course he's almost lost his friendship over that comment. But he does say Stinger in theory should actually be very effective against Shahed type drones. Although not cost effective for the reasons I just said. But it would require a Stinger team ready for standby, receiving cueing from the sensor, or at least doing their own visual searching and scanning. And those of you who are air defense bubs and ball people at cocktail parties, cueing is that they're being able to cue to shoot, or certainly with man pads, setting that up at the tactical level is always a challenge. And,
sure.
So these things are difficult. Anyway, about time to sign out.
Let's do it.
A lot going on in the world. Okay. Everyone, thanks again for listening to this episode of Eyes On. You can email or text your questions and comments to Dee will provide something in the chat, and we will answer them. Or depending on how many we get, we'll answer a selection of them. So we're releasing a new episode now on Wednesday and Sunday, right, Dee?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, and it's these conversations focused on whatever happens to be front and center in the news at the time. If you think we're talking too much about one particular topic or not enough about another, please send in your comments and they will be duly noted and perhaps
or ignored.
Or and please feel free to send me messages by Twitter or follow me on Twitter. Dee's gonna post my address there. Okay, Dee, over to you.
Yeah, I'll throw it up on the. Thanks, Andy. I'll throw all of Andy's info into the show notes and the descriptions of each show, whether it's video or audio. Whether you listen to us on video or audio, don't forget to like, subscribe, or rate and review us 5 stars. It helps the channel big time. You can check out the Patreon, help support the show. You can get ad-free episodes of this show by going to the Patreon, so it's a little bit more streamlined. And check out the Team House.
Yeah, we read all your comments too, to include
absolutely.
And to include the YouTube comments. And someone went on a drunken rant in YouTube.
Yeah, people get crazy.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
So who gets so drunk they can't even spell? But I
don't know. There's quite a few people there.
Yeah, most of our listeners. Anyway, all right, everyone. See you in a few days. Take care.